First umpire, I call 'em as I see 'em. Second umpire, I call 'em as they are. Third umpire, they ain't nothing till I call 'em. What's true for visual perception is even truer for judgments about the social world. Our judgments and beliefs are actively constructed from perceptions and thoughts. They are not simply readouts of reality. In his study of obedience, discussed earlier, Milgram manipulated his participants' understanding of the situation they found themselves in by lulling them with soothing interpretations of events that were designed to throw them off the scent of anything that could be regarded as sinister. A study participant who had chosen to be in the experiment was learning a list of words with feedback that was given by the real participant in the form of electric shock. A participant is someone who is acting freely. Learning is a normal activity that often depends on feedback, generally an innocuous form of information. All this was taking place in the context of an experiment, a benign activity carried out by trustworthy scientists. Participants in the Milgram experiment weren't simply registering what the situation was, they were interpreting it in ways that the experimenter was encouraging. Our construal of situations and behavior refers to our interpretation of them and to the inferences, often unconscious, that we make about them. Whether we regard people as free agents or victims, as free fighters or terrorists, as migrant workers or illegal aliens, will affect our perceptions of their actions, and our perceptions drive our behavior toward them. Construal, one's interpretation or inference about the stimuli or situations that one confronts. Schemas. How do we know how to behave in different kinds of situations? For example, suppose you're riding on an uncrowded train and someone asks you to give up your seat so she can sit. What prompts you to respond in a particular way? Do you refuse, ask for an explanation, pretend not to hear, or promptly surrender the seat? For that matter, how do you know how to behave in even the most ordinary situations, such as attending a college seminar? Without a profound simplification, the world around us would be an infinite, undefined tangle that would defy our ability to orient ourselves and decide upon our actions. We are compelled to reduce the knowable to a schema. Novelist Primo Levi. Schemas: a fast food restaurant and a fancy restaurant. Although it usually seems as though we understand social situations immediately and directly, we actually depend on elaborate stores of systematized knowledge to understand even the simplest and most obvious situation. These knowledge stores are called schemas, generalized knowledge about the physical and social world, such as what kind of behavior to expect when dealing with a minister, a sales clerk, a professor, or a panhandler, and how to behave in a seminar, at a funeral, at a McDonald's or a 4-star restaurant, or when riding on a crowded or empty subway. There is even a schema, alleged to be universal, for falling in love. Schemas capture the regularities of life and lead us to have certain expectations we can rely on, so we don't have to invent the world anew all the time. Schema: a knowledge structure consisting of any organized body of stored information that is used to help in understanding events. Stereotypes. Much work in social psychology has been dedicated to the study of stereotypes, schemas that we have for people of various kinds. Research on stereotyping examines the content of these person schemas and how they are applied and sometimes misapplied in order to facilitate or derail the course of interaction. We tend to judge individuals based on particular person schemas we have. Stereotypes about a person's nationality, gender, religion, occupation, neighborhood, or sorority. Such summaries may be necessary to function efficiently and effectively, but they're often unfounded. They can apply in the wrong way and to the wrong people, and they can be given too much weight in relation to more specific information we have about a particular person, or would have if we didn't assume that the stereotype is all we need to know. The frequently pernicious role of stereotypes is the subject of an entire chapter of this book, Chapter 11. Stereotype: a belief that certain attributes are characteristic of members of a particular group. Stereotypes and construal. Stereotypes are schemas about people of a certain kind. We construe people in light of the stereotypes they call up. Would you be surprised to know that the fellow in this picture is a wealthy lawyer who plays polo and frequents trendy bars in Manhattan? None of these things is true, and you relied on your stereotypes to prevent you from entertaining those possibilities. Looking back, although our understanding of situations often seems to be the result of a direct, unmediated registration of meaning, our comprehension of even the simplest physical stimulus is the result of construal processes that make use of well-developed knowledge structures. Such structures are called schemas when they summarize commonly encountered situations, and they are called stereotypes when they describe different types of people. Automatic versus controlled processing. How would you react if you saw a stranger at an airport carrying a backpack, looking agitated, and sweating profusely? In the post-9/11 world, you might fear that such a person might be carrying a bomb, and that you could become a victim of a terrorist attack. The mind processes information in two ways when you encounter a social situation. One is automatic and non-conscious, often based on emotional factors, and the other is conscious and systematic and more likely to be controlled by deliberative thought. Often, emotional reactions occur before conscious thought takes over. Thus, your fearful reaction to the person with the backpack might automatically kick in without any special thought on your part. But when you start thinking systematically, you realize that he might have just come in from the summer heat, that he might be agitated because he's late for his flight, and that there's no reason to suspect he might be carrying a bomb or threatening your safety in any way. Automatic and controlled processing can result in quite different attitudes in the same person toward members of outgroups. People with low expressed prejudice toward an outgroup may nevertheless reveal feelings toward people in that outgroup that are almost as prejudiced as those of people who confess to explicit disliking of the group. For example, experimenters asked some white participants to read words stereotypically associated with African Americans, for example, jazz, busing, and then read a brief description of someone whose race was not specified. Those participants were more likely to report that the individual was hostile than were participants who hadn't read such words, and this was true whether or not they were willing to express anti-black attitudes in a questionnaire. In other words, whether or not they were openly prejudiced. The judgments of the unprejudiced people were found to be just as prejudiced as their explicitly prejudiced counterparts when it came to non-conscious processing of information. In general, automatic processes give rise to implicit attitudes and beliefs that can't be readily controlled by the conscious mind. And controlled, conscious processing results in explicit attitudes and beliefs that we're aware of, though these may become implicit or non-conscious over time. It's important to recognize, too, that participants in this experiment weren't necessarily dissembling when they reported being unprejudiced. They likely were genuinely unaware of the extent of the bias that was revealed by the implicit measures of attitude. A variety of social categories, not just race, have considerable impact on judgments and behavior. Other easily discernible personal features, such as gender and age, also tend to trigger stereotypes that a person uses in forming judgments about other people, even when the person is unaware that these social categories have influenced the judgment in question. Automatic processing. People often react quickly to frightening situations so that they can take immediate action to save themselves from danger. The girl is handling the snake under the supervision of her teacher, but an automatic reaction is still visible. If the girl were to come across a snake in the grass, she would probably have a stronger automatic fear reaction. If you press me to say why I loved him, I can say no more than because he was he and I was I. French Renaissance essayist Michel de Montaigne. Types of non-conscious processing. Social psychologists have shown that much of our cognitive activity is hidden from us. In solving problems, sometimes we're well aware of the relevant factors we're dealing with and the procedures we're using to work with them. For example, when we solve a math problem, take half the base, multiply it by the height, and we generally know exactly what formula we're using. But these sorts of cognitive processes, where we are conscious of most of what is going on in our head, are rarer than you might think. Often we can't correctly explain the reasons for our judgments about other people, our understanding of the causes of physical and social events, or what led us to choose one job applicant over another, or one romantic partner over another, for that matter. In one experiment making this point about awareness, researchers asked customers in a mall to evaluate the quality of 4 pairs of nylon stockings laid out in a row on a table. Customers were 4 times as likely to give the highest rating to the last pair of stockings they examined as to give it to the first pair of stockings. Yet, in response to whether the position of the stockings had influenced their judgments about quality, they were astonished that the questioner could think they might have been influenced by such a trivial, irrelevant factor. Often we can't even identify some of the crucial factors that affect our beliefs and behavior. John Barr and Paula Pietromonaco presented words on a computer screen for 1/10 of a second. Some participants were exposed to words with a hostile meaning and some to neutral words. The participants then read about a man named Donald, whose behavior was ambiguous as to whether it could be construed as hostile. A salesman knocked at the door, but Donald refused to let him enter. Participants exposed to the hostility-related words rated Donald as being more hostile than did participants exposed to the neutral words. Immediately after reading the paragraph, participants were unable to distinguish words they had seen from those they hadn't seen and didn't even know that words had been flashed at all. By now, there have been hundreds of demonstrations of influences on important judgments and behavior which people are unaware of. When people are surrounded by greenery, they are less aggressive than when in an environment with lots of red in it. When people read a persuasive communication in a room with a fishy smell, they are less likely to be persuaded by it than if there is no distinctive smell present, or if there is an unpleasant smell that isn't fishy. This works, though, only in cultures where dubious propositions are described as fishy. And here's something you can try for yourself. Have a conversation with someone in which you deliberately change your body position from time to time. Fold your arms for a couple of minutes, shift most of your weight to one side, put one hand in a pocket. Watch what your conversation partner does after each change and try not to giggle when your partner mimics your body language. Ideomotor mimicry is something we engage in quite unconsciously. When people don't do it, the encounter can become awkward and unsatisfying. You will read countless examples in this book of the effects of various stimuli and situations that exert their effects without our conscious awareness. Indeed, if the effects in a given study were consciously produced, you wouldn't have to read about it in this book, you would already know about it. Types of non-conscious processing. We subconsciously imitate other people's body language. This is called ideomotor mimicry. Functions of non-conscious processing. Why does so much mental processing take place outside of our awareness? Partly, it's a matter of efficiency. Conscious processes are generally slow and can run only serially, one step at a time. Automatic processes are typically much faster and can operate in parallel. When we recognize a face as belonging to a fourth-grade classmate, we have done so by processing numerous features, forehead, eyes, chin, coloring, and so on, holistically and in a fraction of a second. Recognizing each feature one step at a time would leave us hopelessly mired in computation. And it's quite handy to be able to drive a car on autopilot while enjoying the scenery or carrying on a conversation. You may sometimes have been startled to realize that you've reached your destination without being completely aware of how you got there. We're not conscious of many of the stimuli that influence us, and we're not fully aware of the cognitive processes that underlie our judgments and behaviors. A very important implication of non-conscious processing is that research on human behavior should not normally depend on people's verbal reports about why they believe something or why they engaged in a particular behavior. Instead, social psychologists have to craft experiments to isolate the true causes of people's behavior. Looking back, much of our behavior and many kinds of construal processes occur without our awareness, sometimes without awareness or of even the stimuli to which we are responding. We tend to overestimate how accessible our mental processes are to our consciousness. There is a grandeur in this view of life. Whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being, evolved. Charles Darwin. Evolution and human behavior. How we are the same. Why do human beings generally live in family groups, assign roles to people on the basis of age and gender, enjoy sharing food, adorn their bodies, classify flora and fauna, and have rites of passage and myths? Evolution may explain such behaviors. Evolutionary theory has been around for about 150 years, ever since Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1857. Darwin discovered many modifications in animal and plant characteristics that had occurred over time in the Galapagos Islands. Evolutionary theory has proved invaluable in understanding why organisms of all kinds have the properties they do and how they come to have them. The key idea is that a process of natural selection operates on animals and plants so that adaptive traits, those that enhance the probability of survival and reproduction, are passed on to subsequent generations. Organisms that die before they reproduce may be unlucky or may possess characteristics that are less than optimal in their particular environment. And when these organisms don't reproduce, they don't pass on such non-adaptive characteristics through their genes to a new generation. Those that do survive and reproduce give their genes a chance to live on in their offspring, along with the possibility that their characteristics will be represented in at least one more generation. Disadvantageous characteristics are selected against. Characteristics better adapted to the environment are selected for. Natural selection. An evolutionary process that molds animals and plants so that traits that enhance the probability of survival and reproduction are passed on to subsequent generations. Darwin himself assumed that natural selection operates for behavioral inclinations, just as it does for physical characteristics such as size, coloring, or susceptibility to parasites. In addition, that many of our traits and behaviors are found in all human groups is consistent with the idea that much of what we share is at least partly the result of natural selection and is encoded in our genes. Recent developments in evolutionary theory and comparative biology, together with anthropological findings and studies by psychologists, have shown that the theory of evolution can be quite helpful in explaining why people behave the way they do. Human universals. One fact that's consistent with evolutionary theory is that many human behaviors and institutions are universal, or very nearly so. In the process of human evolution, we've acquired basic behavioral tendencies, much as we've acquired physical features like bipedalism, walking upright on two legs, that help us adapt to the physical and social environment. Table 1.1 contains a list of reputed universals. Two things are worth noting about the practices listed in the table, aside from their alleged universality. One is that humans share some of these characteristics with other animals, especially the higher primates. These include facial expressions, dominance and submission, food sharing, group living, greater aggressiveness on the part of males, preference for own kin, and wariness around snakes. The other, even more striking aspect of Table 1.1 is that the number of universals we share with other animals is quite small. Table 1.1 Universal Behaviors, Reactions, and Institutions. Sex, Gender, and the Family. Copulation normally conducted privately. Live in family or household. Sexual modesty. Females do more childcare. Preference for own kin. Sexual jealousy. Marriage. Division of labor by gender. Mother-son incest unthinkable. Sex differences in spatial cognition. Sexual regulation. Husband usually older than wife. Males more physically aggressive. Incest prevention and avoidance. Social differentiation. Age statuses. In-group distinguished from out-group. Classification of kin. Division of labor by age. Leaders. Social customs. Baby talk. Dance. Dominance, submission. Practice to improve skills. Hygienic care. Magic to sustain and improve life. Magic to win love. Decorative art. Pretend play. Rites of passage. Taboo foods. Body adornment. Death rites. Etiquette. Gossip. Food sharing. Group living. law, rights and obligations, feasting, property, rituals, taboo utterances, toys, emotion, childhood fear of strangers, facial expressions of fear, anger, disgust, happiness, sadness, and surprise, wariness around snakes, envy, rhythm, melody, cognition, aesthetics, belief in supernatural, religion, classification of flora and fauna, anthropomorphism of animals, medicine, language, myths, taxonomy, narrative. The bulk of Table 1.1 represents a number of behaviors and institutions that appear to be effective adaptations for highly intelligent, group living, upright walking, language-using animals that are capable of living in almost any kind of ecology. These universals are compatible with an evolutionary interpretation. We are a particular kind of creature, qualitatively different from any other, with many adaptations so effective that they have become wired into our biology. But some theorists believe that some of these commonalities can be accounted for as simply the result of our species' superior intelligence. For example, every human group figures out for itself that incest is a bad idea and that classification of flora is useful. Group living, language, and theory of mind. Group living contributed to survival in ages past. Groups provided protection from predators and greater success in hunting game and finding foraging areas. The ability to produce and understand language has enabled people to live in groups and convey not only emotions and intentions to others, but also beliefs, attitudes, and complex thoughts. There is strong evidence that infants are born with their brain pre-wired to acquire language, perhaps because of its importance to humans living together in groups. Normal children learn language at developmental stages that are almost identical from one culture to another. At birth, all infants can produce the full range of possible sounds, phonemes, that exist in the totality of languages spoken anywhere on Earth, and they babble all these sounds in the crib. Language acquisition consists of dropping all the wrong phonemes, the ones that are not used by that child's particular language. Thus, children can learn to speak any language depending on where they grow up. They can learn to speak their native language perfectly well, even if they grow up with deaf parents who never speak at all. And twins can sometimes develop their own unique language in the crib, a language that follows rules of grammar in the same way formally recognized languages do. These findings indicate that there are general inherited propensities to develop grammatical language. Universal facial expressions. Chimpanzees and humans express dominance and submission, anger and fear through similar facial expressions. Just as evolution has prepared humans to live together in groups and to communicate to promote survival and reproduction, it also may have provided humans with a theory of mind, the ability to recognize that other people have beliefs and desires. Children recognize before the age of 2 that the way to understand other people's behavior is to understand their beliefs and desires. By the age of 3 or 4, theory of mind is sophisticated enough that children can recognize when other people's beliefs are false. Some of the most powerful evidence for a biologically based theory of mind comes from studying people who, through a genetic defect or physical or chemical trauma before or after birth, seem not to have a theory of mind or to have only a weak version of one. Such a claim has been made about people with autism, a disorder characterized by the inability to adequately communicate with others and interact with them. Autistic individuals have more difficulties comprehending others' desires or beliefs, including the fact that others' beliefs might be false. Autistic children can have normal or even superior intellectual functioning, but less comprehension of people's beliefs and desires than children with Down syndrome, whose general intellectual functioning is far below normal. It seems plausible that evolution has provided us with a kind of understanding that is too universally essential to leave to chance or laborious trial and error learning. Given the importance of accurately understanding other people's beliefs and intentions, it would not be surprising that a theory of mind comes pre-wired. Gender roles often differ. Men and women have different roles in most societies. Women are more likely to be involved in nurturance activities. Each child produces a relatively greater benefit for women, who are limited in the number of children they can have over a lifetime. Men are not limited for number of offspring, and their inclusive fitness is more dependent on the resources they can generate. Evolution and gender roles. Why is polygamy, one man with several wives, more common than polyandry, one woman with several husbands? Why do women tend to care more than men about a potential partner's financial prospects? The evolutionary approach provides a possible answer to such questions in its theory of parental investment. Almost all mammalian species, the two sexes have different costs and benefits associated with the nurturing of offspring, largely because the number of offspring a female can have over the course of her lifetime is limited. The value of each child to her is therefore relatively high. Her investment in each is great, and it's in the interest of her genes to see to it that each infant grows to maturity. Therefore, her mate's ability to support her is very important. For males, however, a nearly unlimited number of offspring is theoretically possible because so little energy is involved in creating them. A male can walk away from copulation and never see his mate or offspring again. Even if the male stays with the female and their offspring, however, his investment in the offspring is less than that of the female. The economic resources of a female with whom he has reproduced are therefore of less consequence to him. Evolution thus provides one way of looking at many seemingly universal tendencies related to gender roles and child rearing. Parental investment. The evolutionary principle that costs and benefits are associated with reproduction and the nurturing of offspring. Because these costs and benefits are different for males and females, one gender will normally value and invest more in each child than will the other. Avoiding the naturalistic fallacy. Evolutionary theory as applied to human behavior is controversial. The claim that there are biologically based differences between women and men in behaviors related to mate choice is particularly objectionable to some people. Such notions are controversial in part because they follow a long history of mistaken claims about biological differences that have been used to legitimize and perpetuate male privilege. Evolutionary claims about human behavior can also lead people to assume, mistakenly, that biology is destiny, that what we are biologically predisposed to do is what we inevitably will do and perhaps even should do. This claim, that the way things are is the way they should be, is known as the naturalistic fallacy, and it has no logical foundation. We are predisposed to do many things that we can overcome. Virtually all human societies are plagued by violence in everyday life, for example, but the incidence of it over the past few centuries has declined astronomically. The chances of being murdered in various parts of England, for example, declined from the 1200s to the 1900s by factors ranging from 10 to 100, and the most horrendous forms of torture, such as breaking all the bones in a person's body on the rack, are no longer practiced in Europe. Civilization can be regarded as the never-ceasing attempt to modify much of what comes naturally, reducing the extent to which human life, as 1600s philosopher Thomas Hobbes put it, is poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Just because a theory can be misused is no reason to reject the theory in all its aspects. While we should not reject evolutionary ideas out of hand, caution about evolutionary claims is essential. Naturalistic fallacy, the claim that the way things are is the way they should be. The human brain is the most complex and orderly arrangement of matter in the universe. Isaac Asimov. Social neuroscience. Evolutionary approaches to the study of social behavior alert us to the fact that everything humans do or think involves biological processes in the brain and body that have been shaped by natural selection. In recent years, social psychologists have begun to examine the biological grounding for all behavior, the brain. There is a new field focusing on the neural underpinnings of social behavior called social neuroscience. The brain is considered by many to be the most complex living system in the universe, with 100 billion neurons organized into at least 50 distinct regions. One of the chief tools social psychologists use to understand the brain's role in social behavior is a technology known as functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. When a person is talking with another person or perhaps making a moral judgment or experiencing fear or outrage, blood flows to the areas of the brain that are activated by the social stimulus. Scientists can take a picture of the brain that detects this blood flow, thus showing which brain regions are involved in the social behavior of interest. There's a diagram of the brain that shows the prefrontal cortex at the front, the nucleus accumbens in the middle, in front of the brainstem, and the amygdala, which is at the bottom in front of the brainstem. Figure 1.4, a sideways view of the brain. Toward the middle of the brain are regions involved in emotion, such as the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens. These regions project to areas of the prefrontal cortex, PFC, which is involved in decision-making and more controlled cognition. As the new field of social neuroscience has matured, it has revealed just how social the human brain is. Older regions of the brain that we share with other mammals appear to be involved in non-conscious automatic reactions to our social environment. For example, the amygdala, almond-shaped region of the brain colored yellow in figure 1.4, is involved in gut feelings, especially those of a fearful nature, about salient stimuli we encounter in the environment. Strangers, threatening images, people from adversarial groups. Near the amygdala is another old mammalian region of the brain known as the nucleus accumbens, colored red in figure 1.4. This area is rich with dopamine receptors. Dopamine is the chemical associated with reward and projects to the prefrontal cortex, where we process complex thoughts and emotions. The nucleus accumbens is thought of as the brain's reward circuit. It signals to the individual in quick, automatic fashion what is rewarding in the environment, be it the smile of a stranger, the opportunity to have delicious ice cream, or support from a friend. What is unique about the human brain when compared with the brains of other mammals is the size of our neocortex, which consists of the layers of neurons on top of older regions of the brain, such as the amygdala. Significant areas of the neocortex are involved in reasoning, abstract thought, and memory. At the same time, social neuroscientists have demonstrated that regions of the neocortex are involved in social behavior. For example, different regions of the prefrontal cortex are involved in self-awareness and moral judgment. There is also an empathy network of the neocortex that enables us to feel the feelings of others, and a mentalizing network that enables us to understand other people's mental states, intentions, desires, and beliefs. Yet another region of the neocortex is activated both when we're rejected socially and when we're esteemed by others. These advances by social neuroscientists set the stage for answers to intriguing questions, such as why gaining power so often leads to its abuse, or why people experience a warm glow when they cooperate with others. These discoveries have also provided a window into the development of social behavior by tracing physical changes in the brain. For example, it turns out that a region of the brain that alerts people to danger is poorly developed until early adulthood. This late development of an important brain region may help explain why adolescents take greater risks in how they drive, for instance, than people in their mid-20s and beyond. Neuroscience not only tells us which areas of the brain function most when certain kinds of activities are taking place, it also informs us about how the brain, the mind, and behavior function as a unit, and how social factors influence each of these components at the same time. Young man, go to your room and stay there until your cerebral cortex matures. Looking back, evolutionary theory informs our understanding of human behavior, just as it does our understanding of the physical characteristics of plants and animals. The many universals of human behavior suggest that some of these behaviors may be pre-wired, especially language and theory of mind. Differential parental investment of males and females may help us understand certain differences between women and men. Although misunderstandings and misapplications of evolutionary ideas sometimes make people suspicious of it, the theory has important implications for the field of social psychology. Social neuroscience is helping us to understand what happens in the brain in different kinds of social situations. Culture and human behavior, how we are different. The most important legacy of evolution for human beings is not the way it constrains behavior, but rather the great flexibility it allows for adaptation to different circumstances. The enormous range of behaviors that people exhibit is tied to the fact that humans, together with rats, are the most successful of all the mammals in our ability to live in virtually every type of ecosystem. Our adaptability and the range of environments we have evolved in have resulted in extraordinary differences between human cultures. Depending on the prevailing culture, humans may be more or less likely to cooperate with each other, to assign different roles to men and women, or to try to distinguish themselves as individuals. Moreover, different cultures vary in what they deem morally wrong and how they punish transgressions. Cultural differences in social relations and self-understanding. Until fairly recently, psychologists regarded cultural differences as being limited primarily to differences in beliefs, preferences, and values. Some cultures regard the world as having been created by a supernatural force, some by impersonal natural forces, and some don't ponder the question much at all. The French like to eat fatty goose liver, the Chinese like to eat chicken feet, Americans like to eat cotton candy, and each group can have trouble appreciating the taste preferred by the other groups. These differences, while interesting, are not the sort of thing that would make anyone suspect that fundamentally different psychological theories are needed to account for the behavior of people in different societies. Cultural differences in preferences. Every culture has its distinctive preferences, sometimes incomprehensible to the members of other cultures, such as the popularity of cotton candy in America. Some preferences are more central or important than food preferences, for example, independence versus interdependence. Recent research, however, shows that cultural differences go far deeper than beliefs and values. In fact, they extend all the way to the level of fundamental forms of self-conception and social interaction, and even to the perceptual and cognitive processes people use to develop new thoughts and beliefs. Many of these differences are discussed throughout the book, but one set of interrelated tendencies is particularly central, and we introduce it here.